Colonel Sarah Hayes was the most respected military judge in the U.S. Army. For 15 years, she had presided over courts-martial that determined the fates of over 500 soldiers accused of everything from desertion to war crimes. Her verdicts were always fair, her sentences always appropriate, and her courtroom always conducted with the dignity befitting military justice. But when investigators discovered a hidden basement beneath her family estate, they found something that would shatter everything they thought they knew about military law. Sarah's real courtroom, where she had been conducting secret trials and executions for soldiers she believed the official system had failed to punish adequately. Colonel Sarah Hayes had built her reputation as a military judge through 15 years of meticulous service at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, where she presided over the most complex and sensitive courts-martial in the U.S. Army. Her courtroom was considered a model of military justice, where legal proceedings were conducted with precision, fairness, and unwavering adherence to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. What are you eating while watching this story? Don't forget to follow and support. Sarah's background made her uniquely qualified for her judicial responsibilities. She had earned her law degree from Georgetown University before beginning her military career as a judge advocate general officer, where she had distinguished herself through exceptional legal scholarship and principled decision-making that earned respect from both prosecution and defense attorneys. Her early career as a military attorney had included assignments in criminal defense, prosecution, and appellate review that provided comprehensive understanding of military law from every perspective. Sarah's experience in defending accused soldiers had given her insights into the challenges faced by military personnel under legal scrutiny, while her prosecution experience had demonstrated the importance of holding soldiers accountable for violations of military law and civilian criminal statutes. The appointment to military judge had been the culmination of Sarah's legal career and recognition of her exceptional qualifications for interpreting and applying military law in complex cases that often involved life-and-death decisions for accused personnel. Her judicial philosophy emphasized both strict adherence to legal procedures and compassionate consideration of the unique circumstances that affected military personnel. Sarah's courtroom at Fort Belvoir was renowned for the thoroughness of legal proceedings and the careful attention she gave to ensuring that every defendant received fair representation and due process protections guaranteed under military law. Defense attorneys appreciated her willingness to consider mitigating factors and alternative sentencing options that could address underlying issues while maintaining military discipline. The cases that came before Sarah's court included the full spectrum of military offenses, from minor disciplinary violations to serious felonies that carried potential sentences of life imprisonment or death. Her handling of these cases was consistently professional, with detailed legal analysis and sentencing decisions that reflected both the severity of offenses and the individual circumstances of accused personnel. Sarah's reputation for fairness was enhanced by her willingness to challenge prosecution arguments when evidence was insufficient or when legal procedures had not been followed properly. Her reversals of prosecution recommendations were rare but principled, reflecting her commitment to ensuring that convictions were based on solid evidence rather than expedient prosecution strategies. The sentencing philosophy that Sarah applied in her official courtroom emphasized rehabilitation and restoration over purely punitive measures, particularly for first-time offenders or soldiers whose crimes appeared to result from combat stress, personal trauma, or other factors that could be addressed through appropriate intervention and support services. But beneath the surface of Sarah's principled judicial service was a growing frustration with what she perceived as systemic failures in military justice that allowed dangerous criminals to escape appropriate punishment through legal technicalities, prosecutorial incompetence, or command influence that prioritized institutional reputation over victim protection and public safety. Sarah's concerns about military justice began early in her judicial career, when she was required to dismiss charges against a soldier accused of sexual assault because evidence had been collected improperly, making it inadmissible despite the clear indication that serious crimes had been committed. The dismissal meant that the accused soldier faced no consequences for actions that would have resulted in significant prison sentences in civilian courts. The pattern of cases where guilty soldiers escaped punishment due to procedural failures continued throughout Sarah's career, creating an accumulating sense of injustice that challenged her faith in the legal system she had sworn to uphold. Each dismissed case represented victims who would never receive justice and communities that remained vulnerable to criminals who had been released on technicalities. Sarah's analysis of military justice outcomes revealed systemic problems that went beyond individual prosecutorial mistakes to include institutional pressures that discouraged aggressive prosecution of cases that might embarrass military commands or reveal operational security failures. The result was a justice system that prioritized organizational protection over accountability for criminal behavior. The tipping point in Sarah's thinking came during a case involving a soldier accused of war crimes in Afghanistan, where substantial evidence suggested systematic abuse of civilian prisoners, but procedural violations by investigating officers resulted in suppression of crucial evidence. Sarah was forced to dismiss charges that should have resulted in life imprisonment, allowing a war criminal to return to civilian life without consequences. The decision to create an alternative justice system was not sudden but developed gradually as Sarah concluded that her oath to uphold justice required action beyond the constraints of official legal procedures that had become obstacles to rather than instruments of accountability. Her private courtroom was conceived as a supplement to rather than replacement for official military justice. Sarah's family estate in rural Virginia provided the perfect location for establishing a secure facility where she could conduct proceedings without official oversight or legal constraints that had prevented appropriate punishment in her official courtroom. The property's isolation and Sarah's legal authority created ideal conditions for operating a shadow justice system. The construction of the underground courtroom was conducted over several months using contractors who believed they were building a private library and study for Sarah's legal research. The facility was designed as an exact replica of her official courtroom, complete with judge's bench, witness stand, jury box, and spectator seating that would enable formal legal proceedings. The basement courtroom included all the symbolic elements that gave Sarah's official proceedings their authority and dignity. American flag, military insignia, legal reference materials, and recording equipment that would document proceedings for Sarah's private records. The facility was designed to conduct legal proceedings that would meet all formal requirements except for official authorization. The most significant difference between Sarah's official and private courtrooms was the inclusion of an execution chamber adjacent to the underground courtroom, where Sarah could personally carry out death sentences that she believed were appropriate, but that could not be imposed through official channels due to legal constraints and command influence. The selection criteria Sarah used for identifying cases that required private adjudication focused on soldiers who had escaped appropriate punishment through official channels and who posed ongoing threats to military personnel or civilian communities. Her private trials were reserved for cases where she believed official justice had failed completely. The first case Sarah tried in her private courtroom involved a soldier whose war crimes charges had been dismissed due to procedural violations. Sarah conducted a complete retrial using evidence that had been suppressed in official proceedings, along with additional testimony from victims who had been intimidated or prevented from testifying in the official court-martial. The private trial procedures Sarah employed were based on military law, but modified to eliminate technicalities and procedural protections that she believed had been exploited to prevent appropriate punishment in official proceedings. Her private trials focused on determining guilt and imposing sentences based on the severity of crimes rather than the adequacy of legal procedures. Sarah's private trials included formal presentation of evidence, examination of witnesses, and legal arguments that followed the structure of official court-martial proceedings, but without defense representation or appellate review that might prevent appropriate punishment. The proceedings were documented through detailed transcripts and recordings that Sarah maintained for her private records. The sentencing philosophy Sarah applied in her private courtroom was based on proportional punishment that reflected the severity of crimes and the danger posed by offenders to military and civilian communities. Her private sentences were designed to provide the accountability that official proceedings had failed to deliver due to legal constraints and institutional pressures. The execution procedures Sarah employed in her private death chamber were designed to be humane and dignified, reflecting her belief that even criminals deserved respectful treatment during their final moments. Her execution methods were based on military protocols but adapted for private implementation without official oversight or procedural requirements. The disposal of remains from private executions was conducted through cremation facilities that Sarah had identified as being willing to handle cremations without extensive documentation or family notification. The absence of bodies made it difficult for families or investigators to determine what had happened to soldiers who disappeared after receiving lenient official sentences. Sarah's private justice system operated for over a decade without detection, processing approximately 50 cases involving soldiers who had escaped appropriate punishment through official channels. Her private trials resulted in death sentences in 37 cases, with remaining defendants receiving lengthy imprisonment in a private detention facility Sarah had established on her property. The cover stories Sarah developed for explaining the disappearances of soldiers she had privately tried and executed included transfers to classified assignments, medical discharges under sealed circumstances, and voluntary departures from military service that would not trigger intensive investigation by military authorities. Sarah's official judicial performance remained exemplary throughout the period when she was operating her private justice system, with no indication that her growing frustration with legal constraints was affecting her official decision-making or creating conflicts of interest between her official and private judicial responsibilities. The discovery of Sarah's private courtroom came through an unrelated investigation into property tax assessments that required inspection of improvements to her family estate. The inspector who discovered the basement entrance was initially told that the facility was a private study, but the formal courtroom setup and execution chamber raised questions that led to law enforcement involvement. The initial investigation into Sarah's basement courtroom was conducted by local police, who assumed they had discovered evidence of some type of criminal enterprise or cult activity. The formal legal setup and execution equipment suggested systematic criminal activity that required federal law enforcement involvement and coordination with military authorities. The forensic analysis of Sarah's private courtroom revealed evidence of extensive legal proceedings, including DNA evidence from dozens of individuals who had been present in the facility, along with documentation that indicated systematic trials and executions over an extended period. The evidence suggested a sophisticated operation that had been carefully planned and executed. The investigation into Sarah's private judicial activities was complicated by the fact that many of the soldiers she had privately tried and executed had been officially documented as having been transferred or discharged, making it difficult to establish definitively that crimes had been committed or that specific individuals had been victimized. The breakthrough in understanding Sarah's activities came when investigators located her private records, which included detailed transcripts and recordings of proceedings in her basement courtroom, along with documentation of sentences imposed and executions carried out. The records provided comprehensive evidence of systematic vigilante justice operations. The arrest of Sarah Hayes was conducted at her official courtroom during routine judicial proceedings to avoid alerting potential accomplices or creating security concerns about ongoing cases under her jurisdiction. Her arrest was coordinated with immediate suspension of all proceedings in her official court pending investigation of potential conflicts of interest. The interrogation of Sarah revealed her ideological motivations for operating a private justice system and her detailed justifications for believing that official military justice had become inadequate for protecting military personnel and civilian communities from dangerous criminals who exploited legal technicalities to escape punishment. Sarah's confession included detailed descriptions of her private trial procedures, sentencing philosophy, and execution methods, along with comprehensive lists of soldiers she had privately tried and executed. Her cooperation with investigators was motivated by her belief that her actions were justified and that publicity might encourage reform of official military justice. The investigation into soldiers who had disappeared after receiving lenient official sentences revealed that Sarah's private justice system had been responsible for the deaths of 37 individuals over a decade, making her one of the most prolific serial killers in American military history, despite her apparent motivation to uphold rather than subvert military justice. The families of soldiers who had been executed in Sarah's private courtroom struggled to understand how their loved ones had been killed by the very legal system that was supposed to protect their rights and ensure fair treatment. The revelation that a respected military judge had been operating a death chamber was particularly traumatic for families who had trusted military justice. The trial of Sarah Hayes was conducted under federal jurisdiction due to the interstate nature of her crimes and the involvement of federal military personnel. The proceedings revealed the full scope of her private justice operations and the systematic nature of her vigilante activities over more than a decade. Sarah's defense arguments focused on her sincere belief that her actions were necessary to provide justice for victims who had been failed by official legal procedures and to protect communities from dangerous criminals who had escaped punishment through technicalities. Her attorneys argued that her actions, while illegal, were motivated by legitimate concerns about systemic failures in military justice. The prosecution's case emphasized the fact that Sarah had systematically violated the constitutional rights of defendants and had appointed herself to act as judge, jury, and executioner without any legal authority or oversight. Her actions represented a fundamental attack on the rule of law and the constitutional protections that formed the foundation of American justice. Sarah's conviction on charges of murder, kidnapping, and violation of civil rights resulted in a death sentence that reflected the severity of her crimes and the systematic nature of her vigilante operations. The irony that she would be executed through the same legal system she had sought to circumvent was not lost on observers of her case. The institutional reforms that followed Sarah's exposure included enhanced oversight of military judges, improved procedures for handling cases where evidence was suppressed, and psychological evaluation requirements for personnel in judicial positions. The reforms were designed to address systemic issues that had contributed to Sarah's frustration with official military justice. The review of cases that had been tried in Sarah's official courtroom revealed no evidence that her private activities had influenced her official judicial decisions, but the revelation of her vigilante operations raised questions about the validity of all proceedings under her jurisdiction and led to extensive appellate review of her official cases. The psychological evaluation of Sarah after her arrest revealed complex motivations that combined genuine concern for justice with narcissistic beliefs about her own moral authority and paranoid thinking about systemic corruption in military justice. Her case became a study in how idealism could become corrupted into dangerous vigilante behavior. The impact of Sarah's case extended beyond military justice to civilian legal systems, where her story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing frustration with legal procedures to justify extralegal action. Her case was studied in law schools as an example of how legal professionals could become threats to the systems they were sworn to protect. The legacy of Sarah's private courtroom influenced military justice reform efforts for years after her conviction, with her case cited as evidence of the need for both procedural protections for defendants and accountability measures for legal professionals who might be tempted to circumvent official procedures when they disagreed with legal outcomes. Colonel Sarah Hayes had indeed sentenced 500 soldiers in her official capacity as a military judge, but her real courtroom was the basement facility where she had conducted secret trials and executions for soldiers she believed the official system had failed to punish adequately. Her private justice system had operated as a shadow court that imposed death sentences without the legal protections that formed the foundation of American justice. The discovery of Sarah's real courtroom revealed that the most respected military judge in the Army had been operating one of the most systematic vigilante operations in American history, using her legal authority and judicial position to identify targets for her private justice system while maintaining the appearance of principled adherence to official legal procedures. Sarah's case demonstrated that expertise in law without respect for legal constraints could become more dangerous than ignorance of legal procedures, and that the most dangerous threats to justice sometimes came from individuals who believed they were serving justice by circumventing the legal protections that ensured fairness and accountability in judicial proceedings. The basement courtroom that had been Sarah's real venue for dispensing justice became a monument to the dangers of allowing personal ideology to override institutional safeguards, and her story became a reminder that the rule of law depends on adherence to legal procedures even when those procedures seem to prevent desired outcomes. Colonel Sarah Hayes had created her real courtroom to provide the justice she believed official procedures had failed to deliver, but her private justice system had become a systematic violation of every principle that made justice legitimate and trustworthy. Her story became a cautionary tale about the corruption of idealism and the dangers of appointing oneself to be judge, jury, and executioner.